Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that when they broke you, it didn't feel like pain? It felt like deletion? Tonight's story isn't about war in the way most understand it. It's not about bullets or medals or battlefields. It's about something far quieter, far colder. A war fought in silence, behind lines of code, and beneath layers of loyalty. A war where the enemy wore the face you once kissed goodnight. Captain Mason Hale believed in the system. In structure, in sacrifice, he believed that doing the right thing would protect what mattered most. But belief, when misused, becomes a weapon. And in the world he lived in, where information moves faster than bullets, being predictable was the most dangerous flaw of all. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's what happens when betrayal wears a uniform, and justice hides inside the very machine meant to uphold it. This isn't a tale of revenge. It's a blueprint. A quiet unraveling. And by the time it ends, you might find yourself questioning, not just who you trust, but how much of yourself you've left vulnerable. So settle in, listen closely, and ask yourself one thing. If they erased you, would you know how to write yourself back? Captain Mason Hale had always believed in structure, systems, codes, routines. As a NATO cyber operations officer, his life was built on clarity. Predictable systems were safe. Predictable systems were efficient. But what no one ever told him was that predictability could also be fatal. At 38, Hale was a career soldier in the quietest branch of modern warfare. Information dominance. While others carried rifles, he carried firewalls. His battlefield was a server room beneath Ramstein Air Base, where silence hummed like electricity, and every keystroke could shift policy or prevent a war. He'd never asked for recognition. He didn't care for medals. He just believed in the mission, and in the woman who once stood beside him as his reason for everything. Leona. She wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense, but she wore her NATO badge with pride. A multilingual analyst fluent in 6 languages stationed to decrypt, translate, and negotiate on the digital front. She was smart, sharp, magnetic. They met during a joint task force in Ankara, a mission meant to last 3 weeks. A love that lasted nearly a decade. She grounded him, or at least she used to. Lately, though, something had shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a quiet erosion, like a ceiling leak you don't notice until your socks are wet. Conversations grew thinner. Her eyes didn't linger. She started skipping the small things, movie nights, Sunday walks, the way she used to hum when folding laundry. Instead, her focus drifted to the screen. Always the screen. That morning began like most others. Cold eggs, strong coffee, a brief glance between them that held no warmth. She was already dressed, badge clipped to her coat, hair pinned into a no-nonsense bun. "You're up early," Hale said, his voice casual, cautious. "Briefing with command," she replied without looking at him. "Translation support." "You didn't eat," he said, nodding at her untouched plate. "I'm not hungry." She grabbed her tablet and walked out without another word. The door clicked behind her. Mason sat at the table, staring at her empty cup. It wasn't anger he felt. Not yet. Just the weight of something missing, the shape of an absence that didn't have a name. From the kitchen window, he saw her pause at the base gates. She laughed at something the man next to her said. Major Riker Sloan, new transfer, all charm and swagger, with a combat history that made headlines, and a smile designed to disarm. He had arrived only weeks ago, fresh from an assignment in Brussels, and already seemed to have a gravity all his own. People leaned toward him. Rooms paused when he entered. And now, Leona's hand lingered on his arm a moment too long. Mason didn't flinch. He simply watched. A small muscle in his jaw moved. Nothing else. In the days that followed, patterns emerged. Leona came home later. Her stories became vague, clipped. Just debriefs, she'd say. Long day. When he asked what the meetings were about, she'd shrug. Classified, she said once, almost smirking. Not cruel, but distant, like She was playing a role she no longer respected. That Thursday night, she returned home past midnight. She didn't apologize, didn't offer a story, just kissed his cheek and went upstairs. The next morning, Hale noticed the perfume on her collar. Not hers, not any he recognized. He said nothing. Instead, he logged the date. He didn't check her phone, not yet, but he noted when it buzzed, the frequency, the timestamps. At 2:14 a.m., a message preview flashed on her screen. Same place, don't be late. R. No emoji, just that cold efficiency that lovers sometimes mistake for secrecy. Mason didn't touch the phone. He didn't need to. He walked into his study instead and pulled out a plain, leather-bound notebook. It had no labels, no stickers, just blank pages. At the top of the first page he wrote, "Echoes begin in silence." Below that, April 7th, late. Return, no explanation. April 8th, perfume, unfamiliar. Contact, R. April 9. No eye contact, no apology. Each entry was surgical, clean, controlled, like he was observing someone else's life. But he wasn't. He was logging the slow disintegration of his own. Back at work, Mason buried himself in project diagnostics and drone interface schematics. He remained efficient, precise, reliable. No one suspected the fracture inside him. No, one saw the wire tightening around his composure. Major Sloan, however, noticed just enough. "Long nights?" he asked one afternoon, stepping into the server room uninvited. "I hear Leona's been a beast on the translations lately." Mason didn't look up. "She's good at what she does." Sloan smiled. "So are you, Hale. Hell, half the ops on this base run because of your code." Mason nodded once. "Systems don't fail unless someone wants them to." There was a pause. Something flickered in Sloan's eyes. Then he gave a slow, polite grin and walked out. Later that night, Mason stood in the kitchen again. 2 wine glasses in the sink, lipstick stains on both. He hadn't drunk wine in weeks. He stared at the glass, then at the counter, then at the empty space where Leona once used to lean, barefoot, laughing at something only they shared. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He opened the notebook. April 10th, glasses. 2. Because some people break, others observe, and then there are those who begin to plan. Mason Hale was done observing. Mason Hale had always believed the most dangerous lies were the ones too quiet to hear, the kind you don't catch in a sentence but in a pattern, a missed detail here, a delayed glance there. And now the pattern was speaking loudly. The next morning, Leona was already gone before he woke. Her side of the bed was cold. No note. No message. Just a faint trace of perfume lingering in the air like a whisper. On the kitchen counter, her phone vibrated once, then stilled. Mason walked past it, pausing just long enough to glance at the screen. One new message. No name. Just a contact R. He didn't open it. Not yet. But his mind had already started filling in the missing pieces. At the base, Mason kept his schedule tight. Meetings, diagnostics, silent hours in the data room. But underneath his routine, he was building something else. A map of inconsistencies. He knew how to track enemy patterns across foreign systems. Now he applied the same logic to his own life. Leona had claimed to be working with the linguistics division on a diplomatic decrypt operation. But when Mason cross-checked internal scheduling, her clearance logs didn't match. On 2 occasions, she'd accessed sectors unrelated to her duties, one of which was the drone command testing server he personally managed. She didn't have clearance for that. But someone had granted her a temporary override. Major Riker Sloan. It was a subtle digital breadcrumb, easy to miss unless you were already looking. Mason wasn't just looking, he was recording. Every login, every access anomaly, every out-of-place command left behind a trace. And in that trace, Mason began to see the shape of something deeper than infidelity. That night, Leona came home humming. She was in a good mood, which somehow made everything worse. She kissed Mason's cheek, poured herself a glass of wine, and started cooking like nothing had changed. "I saw Riker today," she said casually. "He asked why you weren't at the briefing." Mason didn't look up. "Didn't get the invite." She laughed. "Probably a scheduling glitch. You know how these systems are." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, systems can be funny like that." She paused, turned toward him. "You okay?" "I'm fine," he said, then added, "You seem happy." She shrugged, smiling softly. "It's just been a productive week, that's all." Later that night, while she showered, Mason retrieved the USB drive he'd found earlier that day, hidden in her sock drawer, buried under unused notebooks. It was marked in block letters, "Do not load, echo file." He didn't plug it in. Not yet. Just held it in his palm, weighing its significance. Back in his study, he logged a new entry, April 11th, USB drive, marked, "Found in personal items. No reason to possess." He pulled up the server logs from that week. Multiple entries under Leona's ID, each tied to his own work console. Commands had been run remotely while he was physically present in other parts of the base. Leona wasn't just sneaking around behind his back, she was borrowing his identity. The implications were immediate and dangerous. She wasn't just compromising their marriage. She was compromising his security clearance, his access, his legacy. If someone ran a full audit, Mason Hale wouldn't look like the victim. He'd look like the leak. The next day, he stayed late at the data center. Alone. Lights low, screen bright, he began building what he called the control mirror, a secondary trace system that would clone all real-time access tied to his ID, duplicate the IP, and reflect it to a hidden server. Any action someone else took using his name would now be shadowed, copied, and time-stamped with precise location discrepancies. It wasn't just a trap. It was evidence. Undeniable, unalterable. At midnight, Leona texted, "Running late. Debrief ran over. Don't wait up." He didn't respond. He simply logged the message and noted her location from the clone GPS app he'd installed on her device 2 days earlier. She wasn't at the translation wing. She was 14 miles off base, near a roadside inn often used for visiting contractors and diplomatic field liaisons. Her phone stayed in the same location for 2 hours and 43 minutes. Then it moved. When she came home, Mason pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed without turning on the light. No explanation. No apologies. At 2:11 a.m., the control mirror pinged its first duplicate command. A server-level access point executed under Mason's credentials, but Mason wasn't near a terminal. He was watching the log in real time. Whoever triggered the command, it wasn't him. He got out of bed, went to his study, and opened the Echo USB. What he found wasn't just data. It was a secondary blueprint of the Operation Echo drone interface protocols, the same interface Mason had personally designed. But this version had been rerouted, its targeting logic rewritten, its remote override path pointed not at enemy surveillance targets, but civilian-adjacent locations, a false flag pattern. The risk wasn't just professional, it was geopolitical. If deployed, this operation would create chaos, and Mason Hale's digital signature would be all over it. He sat in the dark, heart steady, mind clear. This wasn't an affair, it was infiltration, and he had just become the fall guy. In his notebook, he wrote only one line. April 12th. This is war. Mason Hale had always known war by its quietest forms. Data leaks, intercepted transmissions, sabotage embedded in strings of harmless-looking code. But this wasn't theory anymore. This was personal. The Echo interface had been compromised, civilian zones were embedded into the target registry, and his credentials had been used to mask the override. At 0500 hours, he sat alone in the secure monitoring room. No lights, just the glow of 3 monitors and a silence so dense it felt like pressure. He traced every command line in the stolen interface back to its source. Each log matched Leona's access path, but her ID was layered, Beneath his, a nested spoof. Someone had gone to incredible lengths to keep her clean and burn him in her place. But it was more than that. The manipulation was elegant. Someone with elite technical fluency had guided her hand. The override commands weren't hers. They had Riker Sloane's digital cadence. Mason had worked with the best. He knew the signature of brilliance masquerading as routine. The only thing more dangerous than betrayal is betrayal engineered by someone smarter than you. Sloane wasn't just ambitious, he was surgical. And now, Mason understood. He wasn't watching a love triangle. He was walking through a conspiracy. He didn't confront her. Not yet. That would be a tactical mistake. Instead, he built a trap. The control mirror was already active, copying everything done in his name. Now he launched Ghost Protocol, a layered failsafe designed during his early R&D days but never deployed. It embedded deep into NATO's comm infrastructure, duplicating every outgoing file touched by his access point and assigning it a second, digital fingerprint, invisible, trackable only by him. It turned every deception into proof. A ghost with perfect memory. That same night, he waited until Leona fell asleep. He retrieved a small black device from his safe, a Bluetooth audio skimmer. His friend Alex, a cryptographic engineer, had built years ago. It looked like a fob, the kind that unlocked a rental car. In less than 30 seconds, it had paired with her phone. He copied her last 24 hours of messages, calls, and encrypted exchanges. Then, sitting alone in the garage, surrounded by tools and cold air, he listened. Leona's voice was soft, urgent. No, he suspects nothing. Yes, I checked the logs. He's still using the old dev suite. Don't worry, babe. He's harmless. Harmless. The word didn't sting. It settled. That's when Mason stopped being a husband. The next day, he submitted a maintenance request to the central data node of Ramstein's satellite uplink. It was a cover, an excuse to spend 5 uninterrupted hours alone in the base's most secure digital vault. Once inside, he used his admin override to access the cross-division security logs. What he found confirmed everything. Over the past 3 weeks, Leona's ID had been used to access his drone control protocols 5 times, each instance granted by Riker Sloane's command clearance. Worse, Sloane had been pulling full image packets from operational drone footage and relaying them through an unauthorized relay node bouncing between Brussels and Tel Aviv. Orion Directive. The name showed up in a side-channel routing log, buried, in a file dump Sloane failed to clean. Mason's stomach dropped. Orion wasn't NATO. Not officially. It was a privatized paramilitary contractor operating in the shadows of legal jurisdictions. A Black Ops intelligence group known for building missions that didn't exist, missions that could never be traced, never be explained. This wasn't betrayal. This was entrapment. He downloaded the logs, encrypted them in a shell-only key format, and stored them on a secure drive hidden inside a dummy backup battery in his field kit. Then he wiped the original files from every known access point, except one, Sloane's personal terminal. If anyone came looking, the digital trail would lead back to the Major. 2 days later, Sloane approached him in the hallway, all smiles. Command's been praising your Echo interface. Word is, they're prepping deployment. Sooner than planned. You must be proud. Mason held his gaze. Pride's not my thing, Sloane chuckled. That's what makes you so useful. That night, Mason watched the Echo deployment briefing unfold from the back of the war room. Riker stood at the front, crisp uniform, smooth delivery, presenting his system as if it were his own creation. Leona sat beside him. When Mason entered, her eyes flickered. She smiled faintly. Too faint. She knew. She didn't say a word. After the meeting, he returned to his quarters and began his final sequence. He activated a background script across the NATO server cloud, a slow crawl virus that would appear as nothing more than routine packet activity. But it wasn't. It was a mirror loop, designed to take every override command issued within the Echo interface and route it to a closed sandbox environment. What did that mean? When the drones launched, the data would say they fired. The targets would log hits. But in reality, the drones would circle back to standby mode. Harmless. Operational fiction. A ghost war. And when the mission failed, when questions were asked, the code would point to Sloane's authorization, Leona's validation, and Mason's system. Except the only real system in play was Mason himself. He was done being predictable. Done being the tool. He had become the mirror, the fail-safe, the firewall. By the time anyone noticed, he would already be gone. Mason Hale moved through Ramstein like a shadow. He kept his schedule tight, his answers short, and his intentions buried beneath layers of code and silence. While others saw a quiet officer keeping to himself, Hale was orchestrating the slow collapse of 2 careers. Not out of vengeance, he no longer had the appetite for revenge, but out of necessity. He was being framed for an operation that, if executed, would kill civilians, trigger an international incident, and destroy his legacy. And the worst part? The entire system would believe he was the one who pulled the trigger. So he did what he did best. He rewrote the battlefield. Inside, the Central Systems Vault, Hale uploaded the last piece of the control mirror. This new script wouldn't just duplicate data. It would reroute every operational command Sloane issued under Hale's credentials, reflect them back into a sandbox, and log a false success. A silent override. The Echo drones would appear to fire. Command would see a hit. But in truth, every missile would vanish into airspace. A lie of precision. A ghost strike. Then, to make the lie airtight, he embedded Sloane's voice across the mission's command chain. This was the most delicate part. Over several weeks, Mason had quietly captured dozens of Sloane's voice samples, briefing recordings, hallway banter, performance reviews. With a vocal synthesizer calibrated for tonal micromodulation, he stitched together the perfect phrase: override approved, initiate Helix Echo, priority sequence Sierra 4. It sounded like a real-time order. It wasn't. He encoded it into a hidden log tied to Sloane's clearance key. When the operation failed, the system would trace the command not to Hale, but directly to Sloane. Meanwhile, he embedded Leona's clearance ID as the verifying officer on every log, a digital fingerprint of betrayal left for audit teams to discover. But Hale wasn't finished. He needed a trigger, something to set everything in motion at exactly the right moment. Something public. He decided on the Tactical Readiness Mixer, a bi-weekly event that Sloane had repurposed into something far slicker, a wine-drenched gathering of officers and advisors held at his private quarters. Leona always attended. Hale never did. This time he showed up. He entered the event with precise timing, 37 minutes after it began, when everyone was relaxed and none of the attention was focused on the door. Leona was at the bar, laughing too easily. Sloane was in the middle of a story about an op in Georgia, wine glass in hand, surrounded by junior officers eager to hear every detail. The moment Mason entered, both of them noticed. Neither said a word. He made his way through the crowd, exchanged a few polite nods, and took a seat along the far wall. He didn't drink. He didn't mingle. He just watched. 23 minutes later, he excused himself to the back corridor under the pretense of a phone call. In reality, he slipped into Sloane's office, used his old maintenance override key, which he'd stolen back from base inventory 2 weeks earlier, and plugged in a small black drive. The screen lit up. Mason copied the final data package, every redirected command, every falsified approval, into Sloane's Active Directory. He then left a secondary file, a burner plan, a fake, unauthorized Echo mission brief tagged with NATO's highest clearance. The kind of document that, if discovered, would trigger a tribunal. He placed the drive under the bottom drawer, secured it with a magnetic strip, then he walked out. When he returned to the main room, Sloane and Leona were huddled in conversation, near the stairs. They didn't notice him reappear. Or maybe they did and pretended they didn't. That night, Hale slept in the garage. Not because he was angry, but because his house no longer felt like a place where the truth lived. The next morning, he activated the cascade key, a hidden backdoor in the NATO communications framework. Once triggered, it would delay all post-launch telemetry feedback by 5 minutes and reroute the mirror data to Mason's secure server. It meant that when the drones launched and hit nothing, the system would still show a successful strike, until someone looked deeper. By then, the damage would be done. Later that week, Mason received a quiet alert from his server. The forged Sloan audio had been auto-indexed by the system's AI validation protocol, meaning it had passed. Sloan's voice was officially authorized. The operation would now carry his vocal signature as the mission's origin point. Phase 4 was complete. Now Mason only had to wait, but in the meantime, he planted one final thread. He met with an old friend, Lieutenant Sophia Brenner, a systems analyst turned internal affairs liaison. She owed him a favor. He delivered a sealed envelope marked "For Command Eyes Only," containing a redacted version of the Echo reroute evidence. Not enough to blow up the entire operation, but enough to plant doubt. "I need this to land at the right moment," Mason said. "If something goes wrong, I want someone inside who knows where to look." Sophia glanced at him. "And if nothing goes wrong?" He gave a dry smile. "Then you never saw me." He turned and walked into the morning light, the weight of the plan finally taking shape across the horizon. They thought they were setting him up, but Mason Hale had rewritten the mission, and soon they'd find out who really authored the ending. Their countdown to Operation Echo began with a pressurized calm, an artificial stillness that settles before the sky splits open. Mason Hale felt it in every hallway. The tension in clipped conversations, the subtle glances between command officers. No one said it aloud, but the whole base moved like it was balancing on a wire and the wind had started to shift. By now, all the players were in position. Riker Sloan, hailed as the visionary behind Echo's fast-tracked launch, was briefing command teams with his usual polish, unaware that his legacy was about to implode. Leona, still by his side, moved, with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. She had no idea Mason had mapped every login she ever made, every document she altered, every whisper she'd sent into the encrypted void. He had let her roam free, because only unchained dogs reveal where the bones are buried. The night before the scheduled drone launch, Mason activated the final mirror directive. From his secure console inside a decommissioned weather monitoring station off the main runway, he executed the live reroute. It slipped into the mission's backbone like a phantom virus. No flags, no alerts. The drones would receive their commands. They would appear to launch. They would even return data. But nothing would hit. No real-world impact. Just simulation dressed in theater. Then he did something riskier. He pushed the internal leak. At 0430 hours, an anonymous tip dropped into NATO's internal audit channel. It was a carefully worded flag, unauthorized access linked to Sloan's clearance key, connected to Echo override paths outside standard command protocol. Attached, fragments of the forged audio and timestamps matching Leona's login trail. Not enough to fully indict, but enough to trigger red flags across internal affairs. By 0700, word had started to spread in whispers. Something wasn't right with the chain of command. Mason walked the base perimeter that morning, coffee in hand, observing the shift in posture. Sloan barked at an aide. Leona stood unusually still in the courtyard, her phone clutched a little too tightly. The system was beginning to sweat. At 0932, a call came through to Sloan's office from Central Command. He was requested to attend a closed-door debrief. He left quickly, tension written across his shoulders, boots hitting the tile too hard for a man used to owning the room. Leona followed minutes later, summoned to the same wing. Mason, meanwhile, stayed exactly where he needed to be, watching from the shadows, invisible, irrefutable. Inside the debrief room, they were shown the logs. "Major Sloan," a colonel began, voice cold. "Are you aware that multiple override directives were issued under your ID, outside standard deployment timelines? Sloan blinked. That's impossible. The logs appeared on the screen behind the colonel. The vocal signature played. His voice echoed through the room. Initiate Helix Echo. Priority Sierra 4. He went pale. I didn't authorize that. I never said those words. The officer didn't flinch. Then how did your voice get recorded doing exactly that? Across the room, Leona's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, another log loaded, one with her clearance as the verifying officer. Lieutenant Hale, another officer addressed her now. How do you explain these authorization tags tied to your ID during black zone hours? It's a setup, she said immediately. Someone is manipulating the logs. You don't understand. Mason, they cut her off. Mason Hale's ID shows no trace of these commands being executed under his active session. All flags point to your access keys and Major Sloan's voice authorization. Panic broke her mask. Meanwhile, back at the monitoring station, Mason watched the entire security feed from a delayed mirrored channel. He listened to every word, every stammer, every realization. Sloan stood and pointed toward the camera. You're being played, he barked. This is Hale. This has him all over it. The room fell quiet. One of the analysts replied, If that's true, then you've just admitted you've been outmaneuvered by the man you tried to frame. Leona turned to him then, the truth landing like a stone. You said he was harmless. Sloan looked away. The silence was its own confession. By 1100 hours, command suspended Sloan from active duty, pending formal investigation. Leona was placed under watch, their access keys revoked. The mission was halted, but Mason wasn't done. He sent one final package, an untraceable transmission from a ghost server routed through 5 international blind proxies. It contained everything. The real override logs, the manipulated codes, the real-time transcript of Leona and Sloan's planning session from weeks earlier. They had used Mason's system. They had built their lies atop his algorithms, and now he had built their undoing. The file was sent to NATO's Joint Command Oversight Committee. Within the hour, the command center was in lockdown. By mid-afternoon, Sloan was escorted from the base under full security detail. No press, no records, no protest. Leona, broken but defiant, turned toward the last man watching her from across the hangar window. She met Mason's eyes. For a second, she didn't speak. Then she mouthed something only he could understand. You did this. Mason didn't blink, didn't move. Because she was right. He had done this. Not for vengeance, not for redemption, for control, for truth. And to remind the system it wasn't the only one that could rewrite a legacy. When the system begins to clean itself, it never starts with fire. It begins with silence. Doors closing, access vanishing, names removed from directories. And, in the case of Major Riker Sloan and Lieutenant Leona Hale, silence arrived swiftly, coldly, without ceremony. The fallout from the failed Echo launch wasn't just disciplinary, it was surgical. Everything they'd built was erased in less than 48 hours. Sloan was transferred to a remote NATO station in the Arctic Circle under the vague title of Strategic Oversight Advisor, a holding cell for disgraced officers too dangerous to punish publicly and too volatile to keep close. His clearance was revoked, his communications monitored, his legacy reduced to a footnote in a quiet report. His name, once whispered with admiration in the war rooms, now carried the quiet contempt of failure. Leona was not sent to the cold. She was sent to the dark NATO's Internal Security Division, placed her in provisional isolation under Code Gray, a designation used for potential double agents when there's no formal charge, but the evidence is damning. She wasn't handcuffed. No dramatic arrest, but the message was clear. She no longer belonged to the trusted world. Her badge was pulled, her workstation scrubbed, her residence locked. And yet not a single headline reported it. Because what she and Sloan attempted didn't just break rules. It nearly manipulated the machinery of war. And that kind of crime doesn't get prosecuted in courtrooms. It gets erased, classified, and buried. Mason Hale never filed an official report. He never stepped into a hearing room, Never gave a statement. He didn't need to. The system handled its own once it knew where to look, and he had given it the map. Now he simply watched as the pieces fell into place, one file at a time. He spent the following days cleaning, not in the literal sense, but in the meticulous ritual of purging traces. The control mirror, the ghost protocol, the synthetic voice generator, all deleted, physically and digitally. Every external drive burned, every hidden server dismantled. He wiped his system like an architect tearing down a building that no longer served its purpose. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. On the third night, he visited the old comm tower, once the heart of Echo's shadow deployment pipeline. It was dark now, abandoned, the hum of activity replaced by dust and the occasional chirp of a misfiring sensor. In the corner of the old ops bay, he buried a final flash drive beneath a loose panel of the floor. Encrypted, inactive, unreadable, without a chain of custom keys. A contingency. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what he had survived. And then he walked away. At base HQ, no one looked at him strangely. There were no pats on the back, no knowing nods. His name still appeared on the duty roster. He still wore his uniform. But something had changed. Not around him. Within him. He was quieter, even by his standards. His answers more measured, his gaze more distant. In the mess hall, officers whispered about what had happened to Sloan and Leona, but never aloud, never with detail. The official story cited a conflict of protocol execution. No one dug deeper, not in public. Not in the kind of institution where curiosity was often a liability. One afternoon, Sophia Brenner, his liaison inside internal affairs, found him at the edge of the tarmac, sipping black coffee, eyes following the sky. "You pulled it off," she said, sitting beside him. Mason didn't respond. "They're gone," she continued. "No trace. Command's calling it a systemic misfire. Everyone's pretending it was a software glitch, like the whole thing just misaligned." "Maybe it did," Mason said after a long pause. Sophia watched. Him. "You know, if you'd gone to them sooner, if you'd fought this differently, you might have saved yourself the trouble." He shook his head. "They wouldn't have believed me. Not until they saw the collapse happen from the inside. People only trust the fire when they smell the smoke," she nodded. "So what happens now?" Mason took a breath, the cold air cutting through his lungs. "Now? Nothing," he said. "No press release. No reassignment. I fade into the system again. Same badge, same boots, different man." He stood up, finished the last sip of his coffee, and looked out at the open airstrip where fighter jets sat still, unaware of the war that had nearly been waged from behind a keyboard. That night, Mason went home to an apartment that felt foreign. Leona's things had been removed, her absence, leaving gaps that somehow felt louder than her presence ever had. The silence wasn't empty, it was honest. And honesty, even when it stings, is still cleaner than the lies we choose to live in. He sat at his desk, opened a secure notepad on a private offline terminal, and began typing a single line of documentation. Echo, neutralized, mirror closed, system stabilized. He didn't save it. He didn't need to, because some missions don't end with explosions or salutes. Some end with a quiet breath and the knowledge that justice, real justice, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it erases. Outrow, expert reflection and closing. 200. Worse, justice doesn't always arrive in uniform. Sometimes it wears no face at all. What Mason Hale understood, and what many never do, is that the most powerful form of retribution isn't rage. It's precision. It's letting the system undo itself, thread by thread, using the very rules that were meant to protect it. This story isn't just about betrayal or sabotage, it's about control. About reclaiming identity when others try to rewrite your legacy. Mason didn't set out to burn bridges. He made sure the people who built them with lies couldn't walk across them again. As a systems analyst, I can tell you, any structure, no matter how complex, carries within it the seeds of its own failure. All it takes is one person who knows where to listen, where to wait, and when to strike. Hale wasn't the loudest soldier. He was the last one standing when everyone else underestimated the quiet man in the corner. So now I'll leave you with a question. If someone framed you, not just for a crime, but for becoming someone you're not, how far would you go to take your life back? Let us know in the comments. And if this story kept you listening, share it with someone who understands that silence doesn't mean surrender. It means strategy. Subscribe for more.